The late afternoon cold had settled over Manhattan like a thin sheet of ice, turning every breath into a small cloud. Down inside the 34th Street Herald Square subway station, a place where thousands rushed through without ever really seeing one another, a 17-year-old girl stood completely still. Emily's hood was pulled low over her face, her hands tucked tightly into the sleeves of her sweatshirt. Every few seconds, she tugged the left sleeve down, almost as if she were hiding something beneath it. Crowds stormed past her, tourists heading toward Macy's, workers catching the BDF or M-Line's home. But no one stopped. No one looked closely. No one asked why a girl was trembling in a corner of one of the busiest stations in New York City, except for a dog. Ranger, a retired NYPD K9 with a coat of fading sable brown, stiffened the moment he stepped onto the platform. His ears lifted, his breathing changed, his leash pulled tight in Tom's hand. "Easy, buddy," Tom murmured. But Ranger didn't respond. His gaze locked onto Emily, the way he once locked onto suspects in dark alleys. Something about her, her stillness, her heartbeat, the scent of fear rising off her, cut through the noise of the station like a flare in the night. The incoming train thundered through the tunnel, air whipping forward in a violent gust. Emily stepped closer to the edge, and Ranger surged forward, sensing the silent cry no human had heard. New York City had a rhythm, one that pulsed through every street, every building, every hurried footstep on the avenues. Tom Walker, a 45-year-old former NYPD officer, had grown up inside that rhythm. Even after retiring from the force, he still felt its pulse every morning as he walked Ranger down 34th Street, weaving through throngs of people and catching the smell of roasted chestnuts, pretzels, and distant taxi fumes. Ranger walked at his side, a little slower than he used to, but still with the proud, purposeful trot of a dog who once wore a badge. His muzzle had gone gray years ago, and one of his ears sat slightly crooked from an old encounter with a suspect in the Bronx. But his eyes, those sharp, amber eyes Tom trusted with his life, had never dulled. They were headed to Urban Paw's veterinary clinic on 6th Avenue for Ranger's routine checkup. The vet had mentioned arthritis. Tom pretended not to hear it. Ranger, as always, didn't complain. As they approached the subway entrance at Herald Square, a blast of warm underground air hit them, carrying the familiar metallic scent of train tracks. Tom wasn't a fan of taking Ranger onto crowded platforms, but rush hour topside was worse, and the vet was just 3 stops away. "Just like old times, huh?" Tom whispered, scratching the back of Ranger's neck. Ranger nudged his hand in reply. The station was its usual controlled chaos. Street musicians drummed on overturned buckets near the turnstiles. Commuters hustled past, eyes glued to their phones. A tourist couple argued over which direction Times Square was. The announcements echoed overhead, first clear, then crackling, then repeating themselves for good measure. But Ranger wasn't paying attention to any of it. The moment his paws touched the platform of the BDFM lines, his body changed, muscles tightening, posture rising, nostrils flaring as if he had stepped back into active duty. Tom noticed immediately. "What is it, boy?" Ranger didn't answer. He simply stared forward. His tail dropped, his ears locked forward, and his breathing deepened. Tom followed his gaze across the platform and spotted a lone girl standing near one of the support columns, her back slightly hunched, her shoulders trembling, even though she wasn't crying. She wasn't looking at her phone. She wasn't distracted. She wasn't waiting impatiently like everyone else. She looked lost. No, that wasn't it. She looked afraid. Tom's instincts, those old buried reflexes from decades in uniform, fluttered awake. But before he could take a step, Ranger moved first, pulling hard enough that Tom stumbled. "Ranger! Hey!" The dog didn't stop. His paws landed heavier, faster, dragging Tom closer to the girl. Tom's pulse quickened. Whatever Ranger sensed, it was real. This wasn't the excited pull of a dog seeing another dog. This was sharp, urgent, focused. The train approaching from the tunnel roared louder. People shifted closer to the yellow line. Emily didn't move. Ranger did. He lowered his head, widened his stance, and locked onto her, the way only a retired K9 with years of experience sensing danger could. Something was terribly wrong, and Ranger knew it long before anyone else. Ranger had always been different from other dogs, even from other K9s in the NYPD. Back in his working years at the Bronx K9 unit, officers used to joke that he didn't just detect danger, he felt it. He could sense tension in the air, the way a musician senses a note gone flat. Tom had trusted that instinct more times than he could count. During domestic calls that turned violent, during late-night patrols, and even once when Ranger prevented an officer from walking into an ambush. But now, here in the buzzing underbelly of Herald Square, that same instinct surfaced again, sudden and sharp. Ranger's pause slowed as he neared Emily. His nostrils flared, catching something no human could possibly distinguish. Beneath the smells of brake dust, old concrete, and the faint sweetness of roasted nuts drifting from street level, there was fear. Not ordinary fear. Compressed, silent, suffocating fear. The kind that clings to a person's skin. Tom felt the leash tighten to its maximum length. "Ranger, talk to me," he whispered, though he knew the dog couldn't. Still, Ranger answered in his own way. A low growl rumbling from deep in his chest, followed by 3 sharp barks. Short, precise, controlled. It was the signal. The signal Ranger used to give when someone was in danger, but couldn't, or wouldn't, say it aloud. Emily flinched at the sound. Her left hand shot instinctively to her right wrist, the movement small, but desperate. Her eyes darted sideways, then down at the tracks, then back to her feet. Anyone else would have missed it. Ranger didn't. He took 2 steps forward, his head low, tail stiff. His ears locked on Emily, the way a compass locks on true north. Tom finally saw her face clearly, and the truth hit him like a cold wave. The girl wasn't just sad. She wasn't just lost. She was breaking silently, invisibly, right in the middle of one of the busiest train stations in America. The rush of the incoming train rattled the ground beneath their feet. Wind blasted through the tunnel, whipping Emily's hair behind her. People around her shuffled, adjusting positions, preparing to board. Emily didn't prepare. She simply stared at the tracks as if they'd been calling her name. "Hey," Tom said gently, stepping closer, but Ranger got there first. The old K9 leaned his weight forward, planting himself directly in Emily's line of sight. His amber eyes locked with hers, not aggressive, not threatening, but piercing, focused, present. Emily froze. For a moment in the noise and chaos of Herald Square, she seemed to see only him. Ranger took another step, closing the distance. His tail lowered, his ears softened slightly, and he let out a small, almost pitiful whine, a sound he hadn't made since the day Tom found him wounded on a Bronx street years ago. Emily's breath shook, her lips parted. It was the first crack in a wall she'd built far too high for someone her age. Tom watched closely. Ranger didn't behave like this unless he was absolutely certain. Something inside this girl was screaming, and Ranger was the only one who heard it. The platform shook as the D train barreled closer, the headlights cutting through the tunnel like twin spears of white fire. People shuffled forward, tightening grips on backpacks, adjusting earbuds, scrolling their screens without ever lifting their eyes. Everyone moved with purpose. Everyone except Emily. She stood too still, too close to the edge. Ranger sensed it before Tom even registered the details. His shoulders lifted, the fur along his spine rising like a slow-moving wave. He leaned forward, studying every tiny motion Emily made. Her trembling fingers, her shallow breaths, the faint tremor in her knees. Then Ranger caught something else. A movement so small, so quick, it could have been mistaken for adjusting a sleeve. Emily's right hand slipped under her left cuff. She pressed her thumb into the skin of her wrist, not in a fidgeting way, but in a coded, deliberate motion. A motion Ranger had seen before. Years ago, during his canine days, he had been trained to respond to signs of panic and distress, especially the kind that victims used when they were too afraid to speak. A subtle wrist press, a hand squeezing the opposite sleeve, a trembling inhale held too long, silent signals, signals meant for those who knew how to look. Ranger's heartbeat quickened. He stepped forward, planting himself between Emily and the tracks. His collar jingled sharply, drawing Tom's attention. "What is it, boy?" Tom whispered. But the answer was already unfolding in front of him. Emily's breathing hitched as the train roared closer. She blinked rapidly, eyes glazing, and her throat tightened like she was swallowing a scream. Ranger edged closer, until the tip of his nose nearly brushed her sleeve. Emily staggered back, just slightly, her heel scraping the concrete. Then Ranger barked, a single explosive sound that cut through the metallic echo of the oncoming train. Heads turned. A few people frowned. Others muttered complaints about noise. But Emily... She froze entirely. Her pupils widened, her shoulders jerked. And for half a heartbeat, she looked like a deer caught in headlights, terrified, exposed, and desperately searching for escape. Ranger barked again, this time louder, more relentless, causing a brief ripple of confusion through the crowd. Tom tightened his grip on the leash but didn't pull Ranger back, because deep in his gut the instincts he thought he left behind on the force stirred awake. He watched as Ranger leaned in, sniffing Emily's sleeve, then her wrist, then her trembling hands. The dog's posture wasn't aggressive, it was purposeful, intentional, trained. Emily pulled her sleeve farther down, panic flashing across her face. And that was when Tom saw it. A faint, circular shadow beneath the fabric. A bruise. Maybe more than one. Something inside the veteran officer clicked. "Hey," Tom said softly, taking a cautious step closer. "Are you okay?" Emily didn't answer. She didn't nod. She didn't shake her head. She didn't speak at all. But her silence was louder than the train now screeching into the station. Ranger, still fixated, let out a low whine, one filled with fear, urgency, and an unspoken plea Tom had learned never to ignore. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. This was a cry for help no one else had noticed, except Ranger. The train screeched into the station, metal grinding against metal, sparks bursting along the rails. A blast of hot air surged forward, pushing coats and scarves backward like a sudden storm. Most people instinctively stepped away from the yellow line. Emily didn't. She leaned forward, barely an inch, but enough for Ranger to feel the shift in her weight, enough for him to recognize the movement he had been trained to stop. Without warning, Ranger lunged. The leash snapped tight with a violent jerk, pulling Tom 2 full steps forward. "Ranger! Hey, easy!" Tom gasped, bracing himself. But the old K9 didn't budge. Not this time. Not when he sensed a life teetering on the edge. Ranger's paws scraped against the concrete as he lowered his center of gravity, his body sliding forward like he had locked onto a target. His muscles, though aged, coiled with a sudden burst of strength Tom hadn't seen in years. People nearby startled as Ranger's bark exploded again, this time deeper, sharper, echoing off the tile walls. A few commuters snapped their heads around, confused. Some stepped back. Others muttered annoyance. But Emily gasped, as if someone had grabbed her heart with an icy hand. Ranger's growl vibrated through the ground. His eyes stayed fixed on her wrist, specifically the spot beneath her sleeve where the bruise hid like a dark secret. Emily turned her face away, her lips quivering. Her right foot inched even closer to the line, so close that the rumbling from the tracks trembled beneath her shoes. Ranger barked again, louder still. And that was when Emily's composure shattered. Her breath broke into ragged pieces. Her eyes glossed over. Her knees buckled slightly, as though the noise, the wind, the people, the weight of everything she'd been carrying all, came crashing down at once. Tom saw it. Ranger felt it. And the world around them, so crowded, so busy, so indifferent, seemed to blur as a single truth became painfully clear. This girl wasn't planning to board the train. She was planning to disappear beneath it. "Emily!" Tom called out before realizing he didn't even know her name. He reached out instinctively, his voice trembling just enough to betray the fear rising inside him. "Hey, look at me!" But she didn't look. Her eyes locked on the tracks with a hollow, distant stare. And the train kept coming. Ranger made the decision for both of them. With a guttural snarl, he lunged so hard, Tom nearly lost the leash. The old dog planted himself directly between Emily and the edge, shoulder first, forcing her to take a step back. His body vibrated with tension, as if he were holding up the entire platform with sheer will. Emily stumbled, startled out of her trance. Her hand shot out to grab the nearest support column to keep from falling. For a brief second, her eyes flickered toward Ranger, and something inside them cracked. Fear. Recognition. A silent plea she thought no one would ever hear. Tom saw the look. Ranger saw the truth. This wasn't a moment of teenage sadness. This was life or death. And Ranger, the old half-arthritic dog who should have been resting at home, was the only one brave enough to step between her and the abyss. The train screeched to a full stop, doors hissing open as passengers poured out in a chaotic wave. A rush of bodies pushed past Tom and Emily, the platform filling with noise and movement. Yet somehow in the middle of it all, Ranger remained a pillar of unshakable focus. He hadn't taken his eyes off Emily, not for a second. Tom tightened his grip on the leash, but Ranger pulled again, this time not toward the tracks, but toward Emily herself. He pressed his body against her legs, forcing her away from the yellow line and into safer ground. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't subtle, it was deliberate. "Whoa, hey," Tom said breathlessly, stumbling after the dog. "Ranger, chill. What are you doing, buddy?" But Ranger didn't chill. He doubled down. He moved sideways, herding Emily like a sheepdog would herd a panicked lamb, nudging her, guiding her, refusing to let her drift an inch closer to danger. Every push was filled with urgency Tom had only ever seen Ranger use during active police work. Emily pressed her back to the metal column, as if trying to disappear into it. Her breath shook. Her hand instinctively dragged her sleeve lower, trying to hide the bruises beneath. And Ranger saw it. He barked, a sharp, commanding bark, right into her trembling hands. Emily flinched. "Stop. Please," she whispered, her voice cracking so faintly Tom barely heard her over the noise of the station. Ranger responded not with aggression, but with something far more piercing. He whined, a deep, sorrowful sound that resonated through his whole body. He lifted one paw and gently pressed it against Emily's foot, an old instinct he used to use when approaching victims who were terrified or traumatized. Tom had seen Ranger do it only a handful of times. And every time he did, it meant one thing. He recognized someone who was in danger from someone they knew. Tom swallowed hard. "Hey," he said softly, stepping closer. "Look at me." Emily shook her head, eyes glued to the ground. But Ranger wouldn't let her slip away. He pressed his body against her again, physically anchoring her to the moment. Tom crouched down to eye level, his voice steady but gentle. "You don't have to say anything, just let me see your hand." Emily hesitated. Her fingers trembled. She looked at Ranger, those amber canine eyes staring into her soul, warm and steady, urging her not to hide. And slowly, painfully, she lifted her sleeve. Tom's heart dropped. Dark, swollen bruises, finger-shaped, fresh. Her wrist was wrapped in fading blue and angry purple, like someone had gripped her with enough force to bruise the bone. Emily sucked in a breath as if expecting judgment. But Ranger stepped forward first. He nudged her bruised wrist with the side of his muzzle, then rested his chin gently on her hand. Soft, protective, steadying. Emily let out a sob she had been holding for far too long. Tom exhaled shakily. Okay, sweetheart, and we're going to help you. I promise. The crowd around them kept moving, oblivious. Trains came and went. Announcements echoed. Life continued. But for the three of them, Tom, Ranger, and the girl who had tried to disappear, time had stopped. Ranger had forced the truth into the light, and nothing would be the same from this moment on. The roar of another inbound train vibrated through the tile walls, sending a deep tremor through the platform. The floor beneath them seemed to hum. The tunnel lights flickered rhythmically, announcing the arrival of the next train before anyone could see it. Emily's breath picked up again, fast, shallow, erratic. The bruises Tom had seen weren't the whole story. They were only the surface. Ranger sensed the shift instantly. His head snapped toward her. His ears pricked sharply. His tail stiffened, no longer swaying with reassurance, but standing as rigid as a warning flag. Emily lifted her hands to her temples, trembling. I can't do this. Before Tom could respond, she stepped sideways, toward the stairs leading back down to the tracks. The motion was small, but it was all Ranger needed. He lunged. The leash tore from Tom's grip, slipping through his fingers like a live wire. Ranger sprinted the short distance and wedged his body between Emily and the staircase, blocking her path with the determination of a dog half his age. Emily! Stop! Tom called out, his voice cracking with fear. But Emily wasn't hearing him anymore. Her mind had spiraled back into the dark place she'd been trying to escape all day. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she pressed a hand to the column for balance. Ranger barked. Once, twice, faster now, loud enough to cut through the chaos of a New York rush hour. People turned. A few stepped back. Some stared. But Ranger didn't care. He barked again, his voice echoing like a warning siren across the platform. Emily covered her ears, shaking. Please, make him stop. Tom hurried toward them. He's trying to protect you. Let him help you. The second train thundered into the station. A massive E-line commuter train, passing straight through on the lower track without stopping. The sound shook the air like a jet engine. The blast of hot, rushing wind blew Emily's hair back and made her stagger forward, right toward the staircase again. Ranger reacted faster than Tom or Emily or any human could have. He jumped. Not at her. Not to attack. But to wrap his body around her legs, pressing into her shins with all his weight. His claws scraped against the concrete as he anchored her in place. Emily nearly fell onto him. Grabbing Ranger's shoulders instinctively to keep from collapsing, she sucked in a sharp breath. Her fingers dug into his fur. And, for the first time, a flicker of clarity crossed her eyes, born not from logic, but from the solid, unwavering presence of a dog who refused to let her vanish. Ranger didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't let go. He held her there, trembling with exhaustion, his old muscles straining, but he didn't allow her another inch toward danger. Tom reached them, breathless, placing a steadying hand on Emily's shoulder. You're safe, he said firmly. You're not going anywhere near those tracks, not while I'm here, and definitely not while he's here. Emily collapsed to her knees, sobbing into Ranger's fur. Ranger nuzzled her cheek with the gentlest touch he could muster. because this wasn't just instinct anymore. This was devotion. This was duty returning to life inside an old canine's heart. This was a dog refusing to let a broken soul slip through the cracks of a city that never stops long enough to notice. For a long moment, the platform existed in two worlds, one full of movement, noise, and rushing commuters, and one completely still, shaped only by a trembling girl and the old canine who refused to leave her side. Emily knelt on the cold concrete, her fingers buried deep in Ranger's fur, as if holding on to the only steady thing left in her universe. Her sobs came in trembling waves, quiet, suppressed, the kind that come from someone used to crying silently, so no one would notice. Tom crouched beside her, careful not to crowd her, his voice low and steady. "You're safe. I promise you're safe." Emily shook her head violently, her breath stuttering. "No, I shouldn't be here, I shouldn't." Ranger nudged her chest gently, then pressed his forehead against her sternum. His eyes were soft now, no longer sharp and tactical, just deeply, achingly compassionate. It broke something open. Emily pulled her sleeve higher, exposing more of her arm, and the bruises weren't just on her wrist. They climbed up her forearm like dark fingerprints, each blotch a testimony to something she had endured alone. Tom inhaled sharply, but he didn't ask who did this. He didn't demand explanations. He simply said, "Emily, talk to me when you're ready, not before." It was the first time anyone had given her control. Her lips parted. The words trembled out like fragile glass. "It's my stepfather," she whispered. "He gets angry. A lot. And I can't tell my mom because she won't believe me. She thinks he changed." Tom had heard versions of this story before, but it never stopped hitting like a punch to the ribs. Emily wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "I tried calling a hotline last night, but I hung up. I tried texting a friend, but I deleted the message, and today—" She choked on the next breath. "Today I thought maybe the only way to make it stop was to stop being here." Ranger whined quietly and rested his head in her lap. Emily stroked his ears with shaking fingers. "He saw me this morning. He grabbed my arm, hard. Said if I talked, he'd make sure no one believed me." Tom clenched his jaws, fighting back anger. Not at Emily, but at the world that had failed her. "And the signal," Emily whispered. "They taught us in health class that if we were in trouble, we could squeeze our wrist. Someone might notice," her voice cracked. "But no one ever does. No one looks." She swallowed hard and looked directly into Ranger's eyes. "Except him." Ranger blinked slowly, leaning in as if absorbing her pain into his own tired bones. Tom's voice barely held steady. "Emily, you did the right thing coming here, and we're going to help you. You're not going home alone. Not today." A tremulous breath escaped her lips. For the first time, she nodded. Ranger shifted, positioning himself protectively beside her, chest swelling as though he were standing guard over something sacred. The truth was finally out, and the dog who heard her silent cry was now the one anchoring her back to life. Emily's breathing slowly steadied, though her hands still trembled as she kept them buried in Ranger's fur. The crowds had thinned for the moment, commuters dispersing into the labyrinth of Herald Square tunnels. But the world around them felt muted, every sound softened, every movement distant, like the three of them were sealed inside a fragile bubble of truth. Tom offered her his jacket, placing it gently over her shoulders. "You're safe now," he said again, more firmly this time, more certain. Emily nodded weakly, but her eyes were distant, flickering with memories she'd been trying to bury. Ranger sensed it. He shifted closer until his shoulder pressed against her knee. His warmth grounded her, urging her to keep speaking. Emily swallowed hard and looked down at the bruises on her arm, tracing them with a shaking finger. "It didn't start like this," she whispered. "It was small things at first, yelling, slamming doors, blaming me for everything." Her voice wavered. "My mom said he was stressed, that he didn't mean it." Tom's jaw tightened. He had heard that excuse 100 times on the job. Emily continued, her voice fragile but growing clearer. "One night, he grabbed me. I fell. I hit the table. My mom said I was clumsy." Tears welled in her eyes. "Last week, he shoved me against the wall. I told my teacher I fell at track practice." Ranger growled softly. Not at her, but at the story, at the invisible threat he could sense even miles away. Emily brushed a shaky hand over Ranger's head. "He told me if I said anything, he'd make sure everyone thought I was lying. And my mom, she always takes his side. She loves him. I didn't want to ruin our family." Tom took a slow breath. "Emily, people who love you don't hurt you. And they don't get to hide behind the word family." Emily's voice cracked. "I tried to leave the house this morning, and he stopped me, grabbed me so hard I couldn't breathe." She touched the bruise on her wrist. "I thought maybe if I came here, maybe someone would notice." She let out a broken laugh, soft, bitter, exhausted. "No one looked at me, no one." Her eyes lifted again, landing on Ranger. "Until he did." Ranger leaned in, pressing his head against her chest with a tender force, like he was trying to hold her heart together with his own. Tom exhaled slowly. "You're not going back there," he said, his voice firm, resolute. "Not today. Not ever without help." Emily blinked through tears. "But where will I go?" Tom placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "There's a precinct 5 blocks from here, Midtown South. They have counselors, officers trained for this kind of situation. You'll have protection." "A place to talk. People who'll believe you." Ranger barked once, short, decisive, as if endorsing the plan. Emily looked between Tom and Ranger, her breath trembling. But for the first time, a fragile spark of hope flickered in her eyes. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I'll go." Ranger rose slowly, positioning himself directly beside her, ready to guide her wherever she needed to go. The truth was out. All of it. And now the path toward safety had begun. Tom rose first, offering his hand to Emily. She hesitated for half a second before placing her trembling fingers in his palm. Ranger moved with them immediately, pressing his body against her leg as if guiding her step by step, determined not to let even a whisper of danger come near her again. The platform felt different now, less like a place of chaos and more like a battlefield Ranger had claimed as his own. Commuters brushed past, unaware that a life had almost vanished in the noise. But Ranger wasn't unaware. His gaze scanned every movement around Emily, ears flicking toward any sound that seemed too sharp, too sudden. As they reached the escalators, Emily wobbled. Ranger nudged her calf, steadying her. Every inch of him radiated purpose. Tom kept his pace slow. "We'll call the precinct as soon as we get outside. You won't have to face this alone." Emily clutched the rail, her breath still uneven. "What if he comes looking for me?" Ranger growled softly. A low, steady vibration, not of aggression, but of promise. "You're safe while I'm here." Tom gave a reassuring nod. "You're under our protection now. And I've still got friends in the department. You're going to get the help you should have had long ago." They stepped off the escalator and into the concourse of Herald Square Station, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, crowds blending into one continuous river of footsteps and voices. But Ranger carved a path for them, weaving strategically, staying glued to Emily's side with the precision of a dog still on duty. Halfway through the concourse, Emily's steps faltered again. She pressed a hand to her chest, tears threatening to return. "I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to cause trouble. Tom stopped and crouched to meet her eyes. "You're not causing trouble," he said firmly. "You're surviving. And that matters more than anything." Emily's voice cracked. "I thought I had to face all of this alone." Ranger stepped forward, resting his chin on her knee, his gaze boring into her with such raw understanding that Emily's lip trembled. She placed a hand gently on his head, fingers threading through his aging fur. "You saw me," she whispered to him. Ranger blinked slowly, leaning into her touch. Tom straightened and pulled out his phone. "We're calling 911 right now. They'll dispatch officers to meet us topside. You won't go back home today. You won't go back alone. And he won't be able to hurt you anymore." Emily nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Not of despair this time, but relief. As they neared the turnstiles, Ranger suddenly paused. His ears lifted. His body tightened, not in fear, but in alert readiness, like he was anticipating danger before it appeared. Tom noticed. "Easy, boy. We're almost there." Ranger didn't move until Emily stepped forward. Then he followed, closer than ever, like a guardian reactivated by the gravity of the moment. Outside the station, the cold Manhattan air hit them, crisp and sharp. Emily hugged Tom's jacket closer around her shoulders. Ranger pressed against her hip for warmth and reassurance. Tom lifted his phone to his ear. "NYPD, this is Tom Walker, retired badge 5127. I've got a minor domestic abuse victim, immediate danger. We need officers at Herald Square, West Entrance, and send a counselor if you can." Emily looked at Ranger again. For the first time, she whispered, "Thank you for not letting me fall." Ranger responded the only way he knew, by pressing closer, standing guard over her like she was the most important mission of his life. The winter air outside Herald Square felt sharp enough to cut. Taxis honked. Buses hissed at the curb. Foot traffic swelled like a tide, moving in every direction at once. But through it all, Ranger never once shifted away from Emily's side. He stayed glued to her, like a shadow with a heartbeat. Tom finished speaking to the NYPD dispatcher and slipped his phone away. "They're sending a patrol car. Should be just a couple minutes." Emily nodded weakly, hugging herself. Her breath puffed in tiny clouds. For a moment, things felt steady, fragile but steady. Then a delivery truck barreled down 34th Street and slammed into a pothole, creating a massive metallic crack, like a gunshot exploding across the sidewalk. The sound ripped through Emily. She screamed. Her knees buckled as her body collapsed forward in pure panic. Her hands shot up to her head, her breath seizing in a violent sob. The trauma she'd been holding inside all day erupted in a single, uncontrollable flash. People nearby turned, some startled, some confused. But Ranger moved before Tom even processed what was happening. The old K9 launched himself under Emily's collapsing body, bracing his weight beneath her to keep her from hitting the ground. His muscles strained, his joints trembled, but he held. Emily fell into him instead of the pavement. Her hands clutched his fur with desperation, her face buried into his neck as she sobbed and gasped for air. Ranger tightened his stance, planting his paws wide, lowering his center of gravity. The shock wave of the truck hit made him flinch, but he stayed steady, turning himself into a living anchor for a girl who no longer trusted gravity. "Easy, easy, Emily!" Tom knelt beside her, hands gently holding her shoulders. "You're okay. That was just a truck. You're safe. You're safe, sweetheart." But Emily couldn't hear him over the sound of her own terror. She curled into Ranger, shaking uncontrollably, every breath a battle. Ranger pressed his head under her chin, forcing her to lift her face just enough to breathe. He let out a deep, rhythmic rumble. Not a growl, but the kind of sound dogs use to calm pups who are frightened. A low-frequency reassurance. And slowly, painfully, Emily's breathing began to sync with his. In, Out. In, out. Her fingers relaxed slightly, uncurling from their death grip around his collar. Tom watched, stunned by the quiet miracle unfolding inches from him. A retired K9, arthritic, graying, long past his years of chasing criminals, was performing a rescue far more delicate, far more profound than any takedown he'd ever done. This wasn't a dog reacting on instinct alone. This was a dog choosing to protect someone he didn't know, but somehow understood. Emily's sobs faded to trembling breaths. She leaned her forehead against Ranger's, soaking in the warmth, the solidity, the unconditional presence. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," she whispered through shaking breaths. Ranger nudged her gently, as if saying, "You have nothing to be sorry for." Tom placed a hand on Ranger's back. "Good boy," he whispered, voice cracking with emotion. "Good boy. You saved her again." And Ranger, exhausted but unwavering, kept standing, holding the weight of a world Emily could no longer carry. The patrol car arrived within minutes, weaving through the chaos of Herald Square, until it rolled to a gentle stop beside them. Two NYPD officers stepped out, Officer Ramirez and Officer Holt, both seasoned enough to recognize trauma the moment they saw it. Ramirez softened her voice. "Hey, honey, you're okay now. We're here." Emily didn't answer, but her fingers tightened around Ranger's fur. The old dog stayed pressed against her hip, refusing to let a single inch of daylight come between them. Holt looked at Tom. "You did the right thing calling us." Tom shook his head. "It wasn't me." He nodded at Ranger. "It was him." The officers exchanged a look, half surprise, half respect, as Ranger lifted his tired eyes toward them, still guarding Emily with every breath. They escorted the three of them into the patrol car, Ranger climbing in first so Emily would follow without fear. She sat between Tom and the dog, her hands twisted anxiously in her lap. Ranger pushed his head under her arm and stayed there, breathing slow and steady, until her shoulders finally relaxed. The ride to the Midtown South Precinct was quiet, but strangely peaceful. The city buzzed outside the windows, but inside the car, Emily leaned into Ranger like he was a life raft in churning waters. At the precinct, social workers from the Midtown Community Counseling Center were already waiting. A woman named Dana knelt in front of Emily, speaking gently, asking if she wanted water, if she wanted a blanket, if she needed space. Emily looked at Tom, then at Ranger. "I don't want to be alone," she whispered. Ranger answered first. By stepping so close, his shoulder brushed her knee. Tom smiled softly. "Then you won't be." They led Emily into a private room, Ranger following with quiet determination. Tom had to ask permission to let him in, but when Ramirez explained what the dog had done, the social worker opened the door without hesitation. Emily sat on a couch, knees pulled to her chest. She looked small, fragile, but not invisible anymore. Ranger climbed up beside her, careful with his stiff joints, and rested his head on her lap. Emily stroked his fur slowly, the tension finally melting from her trembling fingers. For the next hour, she talked. Not because anyone forced her, but because Ranger stayed beside her, warm, steady, unwavering, giving her the courage to open the doors she had always kept shut. She told them everything: her stepfather's temper, her mother's denial, her fear, her silence, her desperation at the station, and finally, her gratitude. "He saw me," she whispered, tears falling softly. "He saw what nobody else did." Dana nodded compassionately. "Sometimes the bravest angels don't have wings. They have paws." Tom swallowed a lump in his throat. By the time officers arranged protective custody, Emily looked exhausted but lighter, like a storm that had finally broken open and begun to pass. When she stood to leave, she knelt beside Ranger one last time, Her hands cupped his face gently. "Thank you," she murmured. "You saved me." Ranger closed his eyes and leaned into her touch, his tail thumping once, slow and full of meaning. For Emily, healing wouldn't be instant, but it had finally begun, and it started with an old K9 who refused to let her disappear. A soft spring breeze swept down 34th Street, carrying with it the familiar medley of New York. Street vendors calling out prices, yellow cabs honking, tourists laughing, and somewhere in the distance, a saxophone playing the opening notes of an old jazz tune. 1 month had passed. The city hadn't changed, but Emily had. She stood at the top of the station entrance at Herald Square, a small paper cup of hot chocolate warming her hands. Her hair was tied back loosely, and there was still fragility in her eyes. But now, behind it, a flicker of strength. Tom walked beside her, carrying Ranger's bag of treats as the old K9 trotted proudly ahead of them. Ranger moved slower these days, some steps stiff, some a little shaky, but there was still fire in him. And today, that fire glowed brighter. Because today, they were returning to the place where everything changed. Emily hesitated on the first step downward. Ranger looked back at her, pausing mid-step. She smiled softly. "I'm okay, boy." "Really?" Ranger didn't move until she took the step herself. Only then did he continue, keeping his pace matched to hers, shoulder brushing her leg in quiet solidarity. When they reached the platform, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Crowds rushed past, just like always. But something new happened. Something Emily wasn't expecting. A transit worker spotted Ranger and nudged his colleague. "That's the dog," she whispered. "The one from last month." Within minutes, a few commuters recognized him too. A middle-aged man approached Tom. "That your dog?" he asked. Tom nodded proudly. "This is Ranger." The man crouched down and scratched behind Ranger's ear. "He's a hero, you know. Station staff still talk about him. The guardian angel of Herald Square." Emily's breath caught, emotion swelling in her chest. Ranger, blissfully unaware of the praise, stared up at Emily, as if she were the only one that mattered. They found the exact spot where Ranger had blocked her from the edge. Emily paused, staring at the yellow line, at the tunnel beyond it. The echoes of her fear were still there, but softer now, like memories she no longer had to carry alone. She knelt beside Ranger and pulled a small gift from her backpack, a simple woven bracelet made of red and navy thread. The colors looked bright and full of life against her pale fingers. She fastened it gently around Ranger's collar. The bracelet had 2 embroidered words. "You saw me." Ranger leaned forward and licked her cheek. Emily laughed, a sound too rare and too beautiful for the station that once held only her despair. Tom swallowed the lump in his throat as he watched them. "I think he likes it," he said. Emily wiped a tear and smiled. "He saved me, Tom. I'll spend my whole life saying thank you." A train thundered into the station. Emily didn't flinch, because Ranger was beside her, and for the first time the platform felt like a place of new beginnings, not endings. The girl who once wanted to disappear now stood strong, because an old dog, long past his prime, had heard the silent cry the world missed, and answered it with courage. Sometimes the most powerful rescues don't come from badges or uniforms, but from a heartbeat wrapped in fur. Ranger didn't just save Emily's life. He reminded her she mattered, that she was seen, that even in a city of millions, one soul's pain can echo loud enough for the right heart to hear. And he reminded all of us of a simple truth: not all heroes stand tall. Some stand on 4 paws. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because every paw print has a story, and every story deserves to be heard.